These are a pair of the new second generation Apple HomePods, and they're a strange product to me because it's been like 5 years since the original one came out, and a lot of the kind of headlining features of this new one were already present in the original one. So it's the same kind of speaker design with one main driver and a series of tweeters and mics and specialized hardware to be able to just give you a tuned audio experience based on the room that you're listening in. And it also has Siri integration like you'd expect, but the main draw is really its capabilities as a speaker. So when I got these things in, the first thing I did was bring them home and test them out. And after a weekend of going back and forth between them, I think the new one sounds better. But I say I think because when I did some blind A/B testing on this, sometimes I would choose the older one as the one that I thought sounded better. So to be more objective about this, I brought them back into the studio and I measured them. I just used a calibrated reference mic and Rue to take some measurements. And this is super not scientific, right? This is not some anechoic chamber. This is just my studio space, and it's not even all that well acoustically treated, but this is what I got. So objectively, it's hard to quantify, but I'd say that the second generation HomePod has a pretty similar bass response to the first generation. The mids are a little bit better, and same with the higher frequencies. Those are also slightly better. And for reference, here's how the HomePod Mini and 16-inch MacBook measure up. Now, I don't think there's much value in trying to do some kind of listening test over YouTube because the sound that's coming out of these speakers has to be picked up by a mic, and that's also affected by the preamp that it's going into, as well as the listening device they're using to listen to this video. So there's a lot of variation in how you'll actually hear it, but I would say that the second generation HomePod does in fact sound better than the first one. Slightly. And I think it's just like a testament to how good this original one sounded, right? This was a very nice sounding smart speaker for its time, and 5 years later, it's still really nice sounding. There are some other differences in the aesthetic. The first generation HomePod had a slightly convex top panel, and then the new one is more flat. I don't think it's concave, it looks just flat. It's not sunken in or anything. It's below the fabric, but it's flat. And then the bottom of the device, the first one, if you'll remember back in the day, these usually leave some white rings on certain types of materials, but it has like this big divot in the original HomePod. This one is just a more flat surface, but the mesh fabric that goes around the speaker is pretty much the same. In terms of the power cords, so on the original HomePod, you had to yank the power cord pretty hard to get it out. The new one has a easily removed power cord, if that's something that's important to you, but that's just power cords. Okay, the other thing, stereo pairs. So like the original one, the new one can also be set up as a stereo pair, and Apple does a really good job with it. It's like when you have two HomePods, if you have the money to drop like, $600-700 on a pair of speakers, which realistically is not like crazy money, right? A good pair of speakers can often be pretty expensive, but if you do, you get a very immersive audio experience, and it's, I would say, largely similar this time around. It's just better sounding because it's a slightly better speaker. So one thing to keep in mind is that if you do want to run them as a stereo pair, they need to be the same speaker. So either two second generations or two first generations or two HomePod minis together. They can't be mixed. And I see a lot of commentary that's like, why doesn't Apple let you mix it? It would make sense, right? On paper, it's like, oh, a lot of people just have one of the original HomePods. Why can't you buy one of the new ones, the second gen, and make them work? Okay. It would be a terrible idea if they did it. So if you have speakers, a stereo pair that aren't identical, it is extremely distracting and unbalanced. Like all it takes is just one of them to be just have a slightly different frequency response than the other, and then everything feels distorted. And like, forget about music, that already sounds bad, but imagine trying to do stereo sound, like, or surround sound, where they're already playing tricks with the audio to make it seem like things are going above you or below you or around you. To do that with two different speakers is an absolute nightmare. Now, in terms of the chips inside these new HomePods, these run the S7 chips, which come from older generation Apple Watches. The experience in terms of responsivity is faster than the original HomePod, but the Siri experience is still largely not great. And I'm so used to Siri underperforming or just like not doing what I wanted to do at, when I wanted to do it, that I've just been like, I've gotten used to it, right? Over the years, it's just been disappointed me so many times that I've learned to just have very low expectations for Siri. But when you get a new product like this that's Siri based, it just illuminates how bad that problem is. It's like the shortcomings of Siri are still very real. There's also a bigger screen and a humidity sensor and a temperature sensor that's inside this new HomePod. I found it strange that the temperature readout that this device was giving me was actually a little bit warmer compared to just the regular like thermostat or just a standalone thermometer. Now, my guess is that because the speaker can get warm, it affects the readout. I don't know how much that's going to affect like automation and stuff, but I don't think this is like the world's most accurate thermometer, if I had to throw a guess out there. But the hygrometer, or like the humidity sensor, was actually very accurate. So I have an aquarium in the background, so I do monitor humidity in the studio, and it's on point. So that's good. Now, there are only 4 microphones that are inside of the new HomePod compared to the 6 that were in the original. And same with tweeters, there's less of them now. There's 5 instead of the original 7. But acoustically and based on the measurements, they do a really good job with them. Now, one conversation I see popping up is how the new HomePod uses Wi-Fi 4, whereas the old one used Wi-Fi 5. And how can a newer product use an older standard of Wi-Fi? I see this conversation of how having a chip like this in your system, on your network, is going to introduce latency. Like, are you kidding? It's so not an issue. Truly not, especially not at the bandwidth that these things pull for getting music out into the speaker. Okay, last thing. These devices, the new ones, have Matter support. And it's just support for the newest smart home devices. It's not something that everyone needs right now, but as time goes on and that protocol becomes more popular, I think more and more people will require some form of hub to be able to control all of it. Now, I don't think that people with an OG HomePod should necessarily upgrade to this if they're only looking at an audio experience. Like, it is better, but it is so slight. And if I'm being honest, I would have thought that Apple would have done something more substantial for their second generation of HomePod, right? It's been 5 years, and this just feels like a safety pick. But sometimes that's all you need. A good safety pick.